and Garbo.
The mummy. Is it dead or alive? Human or inhuman? You'll know. You'll see. There's nothing on earth like the mummy.
You will not remember what I show you now, and yet I shall awaken memories of love and crime and death.
In 1933, after an absence of nearly 25 years, Boris Karloff returned to England to film The Ghoul, the first British horror film of the talking era. It was during this trip that the former Billy Pratt was reunited with 3 of his surviving brothers. Brothers who had to accept the fact that this member of the family had done very well for himself. Returning to Hollywood and in great demand, Boris expanded his range with many memorable roles, as the religious fanatic in John Ford's The Lost Patrol, and as the anti-Semitic aristocrat in The House of Rothschild.
Your bid was received, Mr. Rothschild. But to put it as delicately as possible, it was thrown out, shall we say, on a technicality.
You mean, in brief, I am a Jew?
Likewise, in brief, I do.
In 1934, Universal Pictures had their 2 leading horror stars back under contract, and they wasted no time in teaming Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi in a series of now classic films.
Poisoned. Poisoned. And everyone I touch is poisoned. They die.
By now, the press had noticed that Karloff seemed to be getting the best out of this partnership, and that the British-born Boris was more versatile than his Hungarian co-star. Some even speculated that Lugosi resented Karloff's ever-increasing fame and popularity.
Their professional relationship, as far as my dad told me, was one of respect for each other. My father did have some remorse about turning down the Frankenstein role, but that was the only competition among them. There was no personal animosity between my dad and Boris Karloff.
Ready for the test, Dracula? I'm ready, Frankenstein. Then let us begin. You understand, Bela, don't you? That the one who wins this little game of chess is to lead the parade at the film stars' frolic. Okay, Boris. You'll move, right.
In fact, Karloff had no animosity towards anyone and was well known for his many acts of generosity.
I was working as a reader at Selznick, and he said, "You shouldn't be a reader, you should be a writer." And I said, well, one of these days I'll get a typewriter and I'll try. And the next day a typewriter arrived by the front door.
In sharp contrast to his horrifying screen roles were the actor's deep convictions on social and political matters.
Very liberal, very, very liberal gentleman. He couldn't stand injustice.
Because of the pain and discomfort he endured whilst filming Frankenstein, Boris Karloff was well aware of the often grueling demands being made on his fellow performers. He became an activist for actors' rights and was a key organizer of the Screen Actors Guild.
And at that time, that was a professionally dangerous thing to be involved with. It was a union, and it was not popular with the studios at all.
It was literally dangerous. They had to make calls from public telephones, and they had to meet in secret and not leave their cars outside the house of the others. They'd have to park blocks away because it was that dangerous to form a guild at that time.
He was a man of deep conviction and great passions. He was proud of his involvement with it, really proud of it.
At home, Boris lived the life of a cultured English gentleman.
He was a passionate, avid reader. His favorite author was Conrad. His real passion was cricket. I mean, he just lived and breathed cricket. In his younger days, he played tennis. He loved gardening.
My picture in my mind of Boris always is out watering his roses, wearing what he called me wickies, which there was apparently shorts, and he used to go out with his wickies and a top hat to water the roses, and it was quite a sight.
The monster! It's alive!
In 1935, Boris donned the monster makeup for a second time in The Bride of Frankenstein, one of the rare Hollywood sequels thought to be better than the original. It was conceived by its director, James Whale, as a black comedy, and studio publicity made much of the fact that in this version, the monster talks.
You make man like me? No. Woman. Woman. Friend. Why?
Karloff, however, had serious misgivings about giving the monster a voice, feeling that it compromised the integrity of his original performance. Fortunately, audiences loved it, and the film became an international sensation. But the world market was changing. Fears of a war in Europe raised public concern over the effect Hollywood horror films might have on national morale. The powerful British Board of Film Censors threatened an embargo, and nervous studios stopped producing the kind of films in which Boris Karloff excelled.
You haven't changed, have you? But I have.
For nearly 3 years, Karloff's output was halved.
I will not allow that machine to be used for criminal purposes.
His work was mainly in B pictures, usually the bottom half of double bills and children's matinees. The monster boom of the early 30s was over, but Boris had known hard times before, and like Dr. Frankenstein, he knew that nothing stays dead forever.
It presents the most fearsome cast in the history of the screen.
These candid shots of the Son of Frankenstein is the only color footage of my father in the Frankenstein makeup. It shows him clowning around on the set with Jack Pierce, the genius makeup artist. And the nice thing is it shows my father's humor and his gentleness of spirit coming through, because to clown around in that makeup must not have been very comfortable to do.
Although there was much to recommend it, Karloff felt that Son of Frankenstein was a poor imitation of its predecessors. But his disappointment was offset by the arrival of his first and only child, a daughter named Sarah Jane, born on November the 23rd, 1938.
I was born on my father's birthday, which makes me probably the most expensive birthday present he ever got.
Despite the success of Son of Frankenstein, Boris was becoming increasingly dissatisfied with the kinds of roles he was being offered. Anxious for new challenges, he accepted an offer from theatrical producers Howard Lindsay and Russell Krauss to star in his first Broadway play, a black comedy called Arsenic and Old Lace. His role as Jonathan Brewster, a murderer with an uncanny resemblance to one Boris Karloff, was tailor-made.
He gets out of a chest by a window, and when he gets out saying something about he looks like Boris Karloff, the audience just absolutely broke up. He was hilarious.
Arsenic and Old Lace became one of the longest-running plays in the history of the American theatre. It also established Boris Karloff as a legitimate actor and a major star.
Here, in the midst of gaiety and splendor, lurks a monster of psychological horror.
Tonight you give your voice and your will to me.
Starring the terrorizing star of Arsenic and Old Lace, Boris Karloff.
Despite his much-publicized return to Universal in The Climax, Boris's Hollywood offerings were still limited to low-budget thrillers like The House of Frankenstein, in which he appeared not as the monster, but as its maker.
I'm going to give that brain of yours a new home in the skull of the Frankenstein monster.
Of course, low budgets could on occasion produce films of high quality, as Boris discovered when he signed to RKO Studios and producer Val Lewton. He appeared in a series of tightly budgeted but very effective thrillers.
Karloff's words were, "Val Lewton rescued my soul." He and Val Lewton were both well-educated, literate men, and they wanted to present literate horror films.
In their first effort, based on Robert Louis Stevenson's The Body Snatcher, Karloff played the murderous grave robber John Gray. This also marked his final screen appearance with his old friend, Bela Lugosi.
You and I should work together.
You mean we would sell the bodies to the doctors together? Dig them up.
There'll be no digging. The kirkyards are too well guarded.
Boris was very, very keen to do this particular role because he realized that this was his chance to show that he really was a top actor and not just some kind of a man to play monsters. And that was, I think, what drove him to want to do the film and to work as hard as he did it. He was not particularly well. He was having a lot of back problems, but he just buried that and just gave every bit of himself possible.
After The Body Snatcher, Karloff continued to work with Val Lewton in two of the most atmospheric films of the 1940s, Isle of the Dead and Bedlam, co-starring Anna Lee.
It was the story of St. Mary's of Bethlehem Hospital in London, which is still a hospital for the insane. And I remember Boris used to get quite irritated when people called it a horror picture, because he said it's not a horror picture, it's a historical picture, which it was.